What's up, everybody? We are kicking off this inaugural episode of Coaches on Couches,
Coaches on couches, being slouches was our plan. We were just gonna be like lying around.
just lounging. This is where recovery meets responses. We're going to be answering some questions that we're getting from our athletes, and then also we're going to field questions from you guys out there. So if you have them, you can always drop them below in the comments or just post them on our Facebook page. So we got a couple of shout outs first and foremost. Well, shout out to Cindy for watching.
I had a feeling Cindy would be on.
Cindy probably got a notification that said,
Cindy, you rock.
We'll go with it. Funson.
Yeah, two of my athletes have earned state jerseys in the past few weeks. Lee Ruston taking the top step at the state TT. She's been working hard towards that for a long time. Super proud of her. And just this past weekend, Hart Robinson throws down on the back end of a big training block as he preps for Breck Epic and wins the state cross-country championship on the mountain bike. So two different disciplines, two great races, and those are just a few of a lot of folks that we would want to recognize, but we want to keep this short.
Yeah, I heard that Cat 1 race was a pretty close race there till the end.
Oh, for sure. And one of the kind of leads into what we're going to talk about today, heart rate numbers that I saw from that race were just ridiculous. Peak heart rate numbers for a long duration of time. The heat has been a big factor among folks. So that's kind of what we're going to chat about today. Topic of today is dealing with the extreme heat. So we're going to kind of go over some of the things that we've been seeing from our athletes, among the 70 plus folks that we coach, what we're seeing, and then kind of how to deal with them, and kind of work around some of this extreme heat. So one of the main things that we're seeing really right now, obviously, is that, we're in an area where it's 92 to 97 and the feels like temperature gets well over 100. Yeah, it's easily 10 degrees.
Yeah.
Typically.
Last evening it feels like 107. And I myself got a heat down. So, it's a serious thing, and we don't necessarily want to back off training. So, there are just some considerations that we have to look at. So one thing we've been seeing, obviously, is that most people's power numbers are either static or even dropped by maybe, I don't know, what have you been seeing, like 5%?
It kind of depends on the day, but yeah, the power numbers. So like Training Peaks which is what we use. Training Peaks has been cool. For premium members, you can like see your little badges and awards. Strava, you've got your KOMs, and like all through the spring, we're seeing people earning almost every week. It seems like folks are earning those new awards.
Yeah.
And then the heat picks up, and the first thing I started noticing was now we're starting to see new heart rate peaks rather than seeing new power peaks, which makes sense. I mean, your body has to work so hard to keep you cool that you just don't have as much energy to actually put to the pedals. Most of the energy that you are using is actually going to maintaining body function, not actually powering your pedals. Humans aren't actually the most efficient of specimens, especially on the bike. I mean, I think I saw before, if you're like 23% efficient, like 23% of your energy is actually getting to the pedals, you're doing great things. And most folks, less than that. So most of your energy is being wasted. So we started seeing that, and it can get kind of disheartening.
Sure.
It's like, well, why? Why is that happening? Am I losing fitness, or what's going on? So that's, if it was just one person.
Yeah, the panic ensues. Like as soon as the heat picks up, you see your people's heart rates drift up faster, so that cardiac drift happens faster over long workouts, or even like Brian said, in short workouts, we're seeing heart rate numbers that are way above normal for the same effort.
Yeah.
So like Brian said, panic ensues. People start wondering if they are losing fitness. But what we can assure you is that training in this heat is no less stressful on the body, even if you're not pushing as hard. So heat stress is a real thing. And we wish there was a way to calculate it, kind of like Training Peaks has figured out how to calculate the training stress of an actual workout. We've always talked about, hey, if we could just figure out the stress of heat, kids,
yeah, kids would be a big one.
work, everything else. If we could calculate a TSS for all those other things, that would be phenomenal. But it's not the case. So you may see your fitness, your CTL or something like that may stay static for a little bit because you're maybe not hitting the weekly TSS that you need to increase there. But again, you are not losing fitness. Your body is working just as hard, if not harder, in this heat.
Yeah. So first thing, if you're a person who's been seeing that, if you've been seeing you haven't been hitting, the high numbers that you once were, know that that's not just you. That's something, it's a trend we're seeing across the board, across numerous athletes at different phases in their training. So it's not like it's because everyone's in the same phase and issues are coming about. So it's folks in different phases across different sports. It's something we're seeing across the board. So don't be scared. Don't be wanting to go in and change up all of your training to try to, or try to do the next greatest thing. Know that your body's just dealing with the heat. So we want to give you some tips on what to do to actually, maximize your training and keep you safe, keep you healthy, and keep you progressing forward. So some tips that you can do here.
So our big thing, as you guys probably know, over the last year has been hydration. So we've kind of jumped headfirst into the science of sweat and hydration and how they both kind of play in on performance. So number one is dialing in your hydration. So obviously we offer our sweat sodium concentration testing. In the performance puzzle or in the hydration puzzle, you've basically got fluids, or you got fluid, basically water, and you've got electrolytes. So sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So all those, the main one is sodium. Sodium is the king. So if we can lock in and know how much sodium you're losing in your sweat, that part of the puzzle is figured out. Yeah. Now it's just working with fluid losses. And on that side of the puzzle, it really just comes down to monitoring your sweat rate and monitoring how much fluid you're actually losing. And it's super simple. It really comes down to weighing yourself before and after a workout. And I know we actually were listening to another podcast the other day. Yep. On
we're actually driving home after testing. I don't think we're allowed to say yet, but we were testing a big college football team. And we were driving home from doing that, tested 35 athletes. And one of our athletes had sent us over a link to a podcast, which was essentially like how knowing what's in your sweat can be a huge performance magnifier. So we were listening to it, and it was like spot on with all the stuff that we know, that we've heard, that we're teaching people. The seminars we do, it was almost like we were giving this webinar, but this guy had a really good way of doing sweat rate, a way I hadn't thought about before.
Pretty simple.
Usually what we say is you weigh beforehand naked, and you go out and do a training session, typically about an hour long. That way you're not, having to use the restroom or drinking too much fluid or eating too much food. Yeah. So you go out, you exercise for an hour fairly rigorously, and then you come back in, dry off, weigh again in the nude. So we're keeping things constant there. And now you know how much weight you've lost in sweat. Whatever you drink, you need to add that into it. Well, what this guy said was just weigh with your bottles beforehand. So 1 bottle or 2 bottles, whatever it is, weigh holding those, go and do the exact same thing. Go exercise. When you come back in, grab your same bottles and reweigh. And now all the guesswork's out.
Yeah.
Shout out to, what was that guy's name? He was an Australian guy who's been doing testing for 20 years or something now?
Yeah, he started doing sweat testing on Firefighters.
Yep.
Yeah. So
What do you call him? He had a cool fireys.
Yeah,
The Aussies have some cool terms.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So
do that before each
make
workout.
sure you're paying attention to your sweat losses.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of leads into our next point is what we see more times than not in this heat is that people cannot physically drink as much as they're losing.
Yeah.
Last night, I had another evening of like almost a 3 liter an hour sweat rate, and I took 2 liters and I stopped and got 2 more, so I had 4 liters in 2.5 hours and came back and I was still 4 or 5 pounds down. So it's
folks that are on right now, who here calculates your sweat rate regularly? Who pays attention to what you weigh before and after? Go ahead and just throw a comment in if you are someone who weighs before and after, so you know what kind of deficits you're running.
Yeah,
throw that up there. We'll keep on talking.
Yeah. So this is more of the rule right now than the exception. Personally, my sweat rate can go from like a half a liter in the winter to 3 liters in the summer in this heat. So
per hour.
And that's a massive swing. So you have to check it and you have to pay attention to it as the temperature rises and then as it goes back down.
Mm-hmm.
I would never drink 4 liters or 2 liters an hour in the wintertime. You'd be so full and sloshy in the stomach and all that stuff. Performance would decline just from having too much fluid in the stomach. But so more times than not, people are not able to drink as much as they're sweating. So in that case, we really have to consider increasing the sodium concentration of the drinks. Yeah. So we in the conversation a lot about net losses. So sweat rate and sweat sodium. So we're looking at net losses of sodium. Now, keeping your sodium in balance helps keep fluid in the blood. So that means essentially more blood to pump, more blood to cool, all these positive things about having more sodium in the blood. So if you can't physically take in the fluid that you need, we at least have to try to get in the sodium so that we can stay in balance there. And then the body can kind of do a better job at holding on to some of that fluid versus just sweating it all out.
And as a heads up, our guess would be that pretty much all of you are getting rid of more sodium than you are taking in over the course of a ride. We're seeing an average number of right around just under 1,000 milligrams per liter. And most of the people that we see are sweating out at least 1.5 liters per hour right now. If you're just drinking Gatorade or Powerade, you're looking at, maybe 400, 450 milligrams per liter. So that's per bottle and a half-ish for most folks. So odds are you are vastly underdoing it. One performance increase you could see right away would be to up the sodium content in your bottles.
Yeah. So along on that same line, the number one thing that we suggest to people when they come in for hydration testing and advice is preloading.
Yeah.
And preloading has been like the game changer for just about everybody. Anybody who's had an issue or has issues, preloading has been a game changer. Now, we're not talking prehydration. We hear, I've heard it too many times, but people will start their prehydration method is basically
coffee.
Yeah. Well,
and 32 ounces of water.
Yeah, overhydrating. So they basically start drinking a ton of water 3 days out from an event or an important. That's like the opposite of what you want to do. We want to preload sodium and not necessarily preload fluids. You can if you're preloading sodium, you will retain more fluid. So you may actually start like an endurance event, a long century ride or like a long hot event. You may start maybe 1 pound or 2 up, but you're going to be sweating all of that. I mean, you're going to be sweating so heavily during that event that eventually you'll get down to a normal, and then you actually can get below your normal weight.
Yeah.
And you've kind of buffered those fluid losses ahead of time.
You've made sure your well is totally full and spilling over.
But
almost.
You didn't do it by just drinking a ton of water for days in advance. You did it by preloading sodium so that the body retains more of the normal water that you're taking in.
Yeah.
So in a preload, the basic preload is sometimes the night before you can do 16 to 32 ounces of a high concentration drink.
So we recommend 1,500 milligrams. That's what we do. That's what both of us use.
Yeah. So we use the 1,500 milligram concentration per liter drink for preloading the night before, and then the more common is the morning before. So 90 minutes to 2 hours before hot workout, an event, something like that, intense training, you're going to do a preload of somewhere between 16 and 32 ounces of a high concentration drink, so that you're getting in, topping off your sodium stores, and you have this buffer to buffer the losses that you're going to be doing because you can't physically drink as much as you're sweating. So that's what we're keeping in mind when we're talking about extreme heat. So preloading is huge. If that's all you take out of this, take preloading.
Yeah. So we got Cindy who's on. She said that last weekend she's been staying on top of her weight loss after rides.
Yeah.
And last weekend she lost 4 pounds on Saturday. And Cindy is not a large person, so don't think that just because you're not as big that you aren't going to be losing quite as much. So it's important across the board for you to do it as much as possible. Before and after any ride you can, it takes a matter of seconds to do. So we highly encourage you to do that. So calculate your sweat rate, do it often, preload beforehand like Dale was just talking about. Like we said, we can almost 100% guarantee that you are underdoing your sodium during rides, largely because your sweat rate is going to be higher than what you can actually process and consume during a ride or a run. Running, we see sweat rates higher on runs than we do on rides. So it's even worse for our runners out there. So don't think what we're talking about is just for cyclists.
I've lost 2 pounds in the pool. I mean, come out of a swim and be 2 pounds lighter because the pool is 89 degrees. Yeah. So it's not just, we're not just talking cyclists. We just happen to use that as an example here. Yeah. Runners, cyclists, triathletes.
Well, it's tough for people that are swimming too, because it's harder to drink.
Right.
I mean, most folks aren't
consistent. I mean, you can have a bottle next to the pool, and drink between sets, but most people when I go to the pool, most people, I don't see them have fluids next to the pool, and I'm like, they're going to cramp.
And a place you don't want to cramp is in water. Yeah. Full body lockup in water, not good. And in running, so one of my athletes I've got, he's got a high sweat rate, and he's nearly 1,500 milligram sodium concentration. So he's sweating out multiple liters per hour at 1,500 milligrams per liter. And when he's doing an hour 45 or 2 hour run, he can't carry that with him. So either he has to do it on a treadmill where it's cooler, which we're going to kind of get to on other things you can do, or he ends up, in years past, before we got him tested, he was just told himself that, he's not meant to exercise longer in the heat, that, he just kind of has to shut it down during the summer.
Yeah, I've heard that story a lot. Is before, and this is kind of going off topic, but before we've tested now several hundred people, and I've heard it at least 10 times. People come in, they're like, I just cannot go longer than like hour and a half, 2 hours, or I'm gonna cramp.
So if you're someone who's been getting a heat beat down, there's a good chance that hydration is one of the biggest things you can change.
Yeah.
So preload, make sure you're calculating sweat rate, just kind of recapping everything quick here. Making sure you're upping the sodium concentration in your drinks. Make sure you know what's in your drinks. That's and if you guys want to post in the comments like what you're actually drinking currently, go ahead and do so, and we can offer maybe some feedback on that. And then another thing, if you see us looking off screen, that's where we got our handy whiteboard to make sure we are covering things. Post exercise, race, training, rehydration is huge. When we were testing the football team last week, so many of them weren't having issues until later, and so many of them, all they ever really focused on was what they were consuming during their practices.
So they would complain. We would have to kind of get it out of them, but they would say they don't cramp, and then we're like, what about after? And they're like, what do you mean?
What about middle of the night? Do you have like zingers in the middle of the night, or feet cramping?
Yeah, if your feet cramp, or you catch a cramp later in the day, or something like that. That is a effect of not having a proper rehydration schedule. So for a lot of people, especially if your sweat sodium is high, you can basically get done with your activity and then basically do another preload. So 16 ounces of a high concentration drink just to get that sodium back in balance quick. And then after that, you can pretty much let your food and water intake do the job there.
So if you get home and you're just like craving salty foods, if you're wanting to drink pickle juice, if you don't like the taste of pickle juice, but you feel like you need it, or you're eating pickles, anything super salty, there's a good chance that you've run a big deficit there.
You would not want to eat from my pickle jar.
So make sure you reload. So we got preload, doing what you need to during, and then reloading. Another thing we wrote down, a way to help conquer the heat, ice socks and cold drinks. So the colder you can keep your drinks, especially, when you're starting out, it's kind of tougher if you're, out and about and refilling. The colder you can keep the fluids, that helps keep the core temperature down. And the other thing is the ice sock. So the ice sock is a sweet little contraption. Don't use an actual sock, although you could. You buy a thing of pantyhose. You tie the pantyhose off after you've stuffed it full of ice. And for cyclists, this is going to be a little harder for runners, I guess. For cyclists, you then shove it into your jersey, and you get this ice cold water that's now dripping down you and helping keep you cool.
You get some weird looks at first at races when you're a dude and you bust out a thing of pantyhose. But then when you throw ice in it, they're like, I know what you're doing. But as for runners, one thing we've done in the past is frozen sponges. So you like wet a sponge, freeze it, and then you can stick those inside your kit and allow them to melt a little bit, and then you can also re-wet them and then sponge it over you. The big points, if you're actually trying to cool yourself off, you've got to go for either your carotid or femoral arteries. So keep it cool around your neck or basically in your crotch. That's the two main places to try to cool yourself off. Other things are like freezing half bottles. So like if you're going to carry a bottle, freeze half of it, put the rest of your fluids in there, and then you've at least got ice for a little while to melt it. Cool fluids. They've actually done a lot of studies on how cold fluids can affect your time to exhaustion as far as in the heat. They did a neat one with like Gatorade slushies or something like that back in the day, and it actually prolonged exhaustion in the heat by like 20 minutes. So it was pretty significant gain. So freezing bottles, frozen sponges, pantyhose socks with ice in it, anything that can keep you
cooler. And if our people at home have, if you guys are watching and you have any ideas that we haven't mentioned or anything that you do that helps you keep cool, post a comment. Post a comment there. And feel free to share this video as well. If you know anyone who's prone to having a heat beat down, you can tag them in the comment box or give it a share. Now we're going to go on to the last part here. So what do you do as far as training is concerned? So we talked about everyone loves to see their performance increase over time. We want to make sure that the training we're doing is actually benefiting us, and we're seeing performance gains from that. When the body's having to work so hard just to stay cool, it can be tough to do. So the tips that we're giving to our athletes, we can kind of alternate here. Taking some of your quality sessions indoors. So, you got treadmills that you can use. You've got most people have access to or own their own bike trainers. So the quality stuff where you're needing to put out a strong stress on the body, on the muscles, take those indoors where you can keep things cooler. Leave the outdoor stuff for just making sure you're adapting more to the heat and staying adapted to the heat. That's one big tip that you can do.
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't get into these sports to be inside a lot.
Yeah.
But if you're an athlete and you're like training for performance gains, your brain weighs so heavily on how you're going to perform in your next event, race, whatever. It can be a massive hit to the brain, to the mental side of the things, if you're just constantly unable to hit the paces, power that you're assigned or that you're trying to hit.
Yep.
So I tell people, take the next quality session indoors, set yourself up in cooler conditions and just see what happens. And generally 9 times out of 10 people hit it like that.
Yep.
And that's that mental boost that you actually, can do what you're trying to do in the training that you're trying to do right now. It really is just the heat is having, having its way with you. So take it indoors.
Yeah.
So the other big thing is go off feel. If you're outside and you're having to do like a zone 4, what, if you've been doing this at any time, what zone 4 feels like, or you should know what zone 3 feels like.
If you don't, there's your performance tip. Learn what each zone feels like so that you can translate that feel out on the road.
Yeah, for sure. So go more by feel and how it feels on the body. And don't worry necessarily about the hard numbers.
Yeah.
And, that alone, if you're going by feel and you're hitting it and it feels, and you're still like 20 seconds slower per mile, or you're still 20 watts low or whatever, you're still stressing the body just as much, if not more. Again, we can't calculate it, but the heat makes a huge difference. So I've seen people who are very talented and their paces and everything in the heat, are 20 seconds slower, in the pool, 20 seconds slower. It's crazy. Sometimes it's just like, you just can't push as hard. So you got to just go off feel. Don't worry about the hard numbers. And then, move on with it. Don't harp on it because you didn't hit the target.
Yeah. Know that it's okay to not be blasting through PRs during the summertime when the temperatures are hot.
I mean, that's really our final point is just don't get discouraged about it.
Yeah.
If you're not like, again, the badges, the Training Peak thing, the badges and the Strava PRs and all that stuff, they're awesome to see. And I know that a lot of people gauge their progress heavily on those now.
But a tailwind gives you a huge bonus as well if you're using Strava.
Sure. Yeah. So just don't get discouraged if you're not like seeing those things just pop off every workout.
Some things you can do: compare your performance to other people. I mean, most of the folks we deal with are racers. See how you're performing relative to other people, and use that as a little more of a metric than you would, the hard numbers. Even that can be deceiving. Another kind of big thing I took from that podcast we were listening to is the guy was talking about, there tends to be people, and it's usually related to sweat rate, that do better in the cold, and others that do better in the hot. And, he didn't know the scientific reason behind that, besides the fact that one's losing a lot less sodium than the other. But his thought was that some people are just better, their muscles fire better and they perform better at a higher core temperature. So that could be a big part of it as well. This guy had worked with Craig Alexander, and said one remarkable thing about him is he's got just a really low sweat rate, and his body does well in hot conditions. You may be a person that doesn't do well in hot conditions. Pick races, pick events that are cooler. Keep training through the summer, but don't beat yourself up during the summertime when it's hot. Instead, use this as kind of as a period to I guess, sort of refocus, have fun, and then kind of gear up and pick goal events that are going to be well suited to you. Now, if you're a person who does well in the hot, now's your time.
That was going to be my pro tip of the day. Is
Stole it. Stole it.
Pick your events based on the conditions. Not just the course, but also you want weather conditions that suit you as well.
Yeah.
I know when I picked my first Ironman, I knew that I did not want to go south. I wanted to go north, and I went up to Lake Placid, which is this weekend. Went up to Lake Placid, and it was I trained through the July, June and July heat in Memphis, and then went up there, and it was 70 degrees, and it was 55 degrees that morning.
Ooh.
But it didn't crack 75 all day, and felt great. Same thing. Even with Florida, was a little unsure about doing Florida, but it's also in November where it was mid to upper 70s, even though it was a little humid, but mid to upper 70s. And for somebody who trains in the 80s and 90s most of the summer, that's nothing. I will say one thing I will kind of add is, having been through all this hydration stuff in the past year or 2 years, and mine started years ago, but I will say ever since getting the sodium balanced in my drinks post workout, during the day, my perception on heat has changed. I don't know if that's the same for you, but while it may still, take me down a peg here and there, I don't go into hot races thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna
cramp,
I'm gonna
blow up. Yeah,
I'm gonna feel terrible afterwards.
Miserable.
Cramp, bonk, This sucks. You start an event like that, and you're doomed. So that has since stopped, and to some extent, I almost feel like I have a bit of an advantage over some of the people I race against, because I know that they're not their hydration is not on point.
For sure.
And the heat can take over on them versus me. So,
all right, that is most of what we had for you. If you have questions, now is your chance to throw them into the comment box. The screen's right here. So if you see Dale doesn't like to stare into your soul.
I don't like.
Dale likes to stare at the screen, is what we're looking at here. So if you got questions, go ahead and post them up. If you enjoyed this and you'd like to see us do more of them, feel free to share it, like it, and that'll give us an indication. If there's a topic you want us to cover, we're more than happy to do so. In fact, it makes it easier on us if we are able to talk about what you guys want to know about.
Yep.
So feel free to do that. But our plan is to have a different couch each time, right?
We got to find new couches.
This is kind of like the Seinfeld. What is it? Comedians getting coffee in cars, getting coffee.
Coaches on couches.
Being slouches. So I think that's all we got. If you're interested in getting a hydration test done, we'll put a comment down below afterwards. It's been a game changer for a lot of folks, ourselves included. And I know some of the people who are watching live right now, we've tested most of them, and it's been a big benefit for them. So if you want to get that done, we'll put a link in, and otherwise,
that's it.
Time
for lunch. For episode 1.
Episode inaugural.
All right. No questions.
No questions.
We're out of here.
Peace.
It's time for some lunch. Uh-oh. My mouse died.
Uh-oh.
Try this again.
Peace. Uh-oh.
One more time.
Peace.
Ah!